Rachel Maddow didn't introduce Pam Bondi with irony. She didn't reach for the usual rhythm of deflection or satire. She looked into the camera and said clearly, "Tonight's guest is Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, political surrogate, and someone whose presence on this show may raise more questions than we'll have time to ask. But we're going to try anyway." No music played. The camera didn't cut to audience. Pam Bondi walked onto the set in black. Understated. Composed. She didn't wave. She didn't smile wide. She shook Rachel's hand, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap like someone who had walked into hundreds of rooms just like this one. Rooms that never quite wanted her there. Rachel looked at her and said, "Why agree to this?" Pam said, "Because too many people talk about each other instead of to each other." Rachel didn't nod. She said, "Then let's talk." They didn't ease in. Rachel reached for her first question. "You've defended people, institutions, and decisions that a lot of viewers associate with harm. When you sit across from that judgment, what part of you stays untouched?" Pam didn't flinch. "The part that knows the law isn't built to make you feel safe. It's built to make you accountable." Rachel said, "But who holds you accountable when your work protects those already in power?" Pam said, "That question assumes my job is to balance power. It's not. It's to make sure every side gets heard, especially the ones people don't want to hear anymore." The studio stayed quiet. There were no applause signs. There was no laughter. Just a slow, steady weight beginning to settle between two people who had come for very different reasons, but neither one had come to blink. Rachel leaned in. "You've defended clients accused of corruption, abuse, obstruction. You say it's about fairness. Others say it's about survival. Whose survival are you protecting?" Pam looked directly at her. "The survival of process. Because once the system stops protecting everyone, even the people you don't like, it won't protect you either." Rachel paused. "And what happens when the system works exactly as designed, to protect the powerful?" Pam answered, "Then we change the design. But not by skipping the process. Not by deciding who deserves fairness and who doesn't." The conversation didn't escalate. It deepened. Rachel asked, "Do you believe the people you defend are innocent?" Pam said, "I believe they're entitled to a defense." Rachel said, "But what if their defense means more people get hurt?" Pam said, "Then that's on the policy, not the lawyer. My job isn't to make you comfortable. It's to make the Constitution hold." The audience didn't react. Because this wasn't theater. This was resistance. Not loud. Not flashy. Just two people refusing to fold. Rachel Maddow set down her next question card. She didn't need it. The direction was already changing. She looked across the desk and asked, "Have you ever sat with regret?" Pam Bondi didn't blink. "Plenty." Rachel asked, "Then why not say it out loud?" Pam said, "Because this isn't a room where honesty gets rewarded. It gets framed." Rachel didn't argue. She waited. Pam continued, "I've defended people I disagreed with. I've said things I later wouldn't repeat. But I stayed. I showed up. Because the work doesn't stop being necessary just because you're uncomfortable inside it." Rachel said, "That sounds like justification." Pam replied, "That's what it sounds like to someone who's never been asked to carry both the truth and the consequence at the same time." The audience didn't clap. No camera moved. Rachel asked, "What's the worst thing someone's ever said about you?" Pam said, "That I defend the indefensible." Rachel followed, "And what did you do when you heard that?" Pam replied, "I went to work." Because the moment you start defending your own name louder than your client's case, you're no longer in the profession. You're in the performance. Rachel tilted her head slightly. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't resisting. She was watching. "Are you tired of being misunderstood?" Pam said, "No. I'm tired of people thinking I came here to be liked. I came here to be clear." Backstage, a producer mouthed, "We're going long." The director didn't respond. No one interrupted. Because the show was still running, but something more rare had taken over. The sound of someone who knew exactly why she was being listened to and didn't need the audience's approval to keep speaking. Rachel folded her arms. "Do you think people will hear you differently after tonight?" Pam said, "I think most won't hear me at all. They'll hear what they expected. That's the price of walking into a room that's already made up its mind." Rachel asked, "Then why sit here?" Pam said, Because it matters that I can. Rachel was quiet. Not because she had nothing left to ask, but because Pam wasn't asking for engagement. She was asking to be allowed the space to stay whole. Rachel Maddow leaned back in her chair. The posture wasn't retreat. It was clarity. She wasn't here to dismantle anything anymore. She was here to hold it still enough to see what stayed intact. She asked, "What's the cost of showing up this way? Steady, unapologetic, sharp?" Pam Bondi answered without pause. "The cost is being hated before you speak. The cost is being dismissed after. The cost is knowing that no matter how measured you are, people will still say you shouted." Rachel asked, "And why keep paying it?" Pam said, "Because I don't speak to be received. I speak so there's a record of what wasn't welcomed." The studio was silent again. Even the lights felt lower now, not in brightness, but in presence. Rachel asked, "Do you ever wonder if you're wrong?" Pam's voice dropped slightly. Still clear. Still composed. "Of course. But I wonder it privately. Because this isn't a room that lets you change your mind without making it a headline." Rachel asked, "Then where do you go when the weight gets too heavy?" Pam was still, then said, "Back to work. Because it's the only place where no one expects me to pretend it doesn't hurt." There was no audience reaction. Not because they didn't care. Because they didn't know where they were supposed to land. And that, more than anything, made them listen harder. Rachel said, "I don't think you're here to convince me." Pam answered, "I'm not. I'm here to survive the room." Rachel asked, "And what happens after?" Pam said, "You move on. I stay where I was before it started." This wasn't humility. It wasn't bravado. It was someone speaking from a place so used to being misheard that clarity no longer felt like a privilege. It felt like survival. Rachel folded her hands. "What do you think I'll do with this interview?" Pam looked directly at her. "You'll let it breathe. Or you won't. Either way, I'll walk out the same way I walked in, prepared to be erased, but unwilling to erase myself first." Rachel Maddow placed her pen on the desk. She wasn't taking notes anymore. She wasn't writing questions. She was watching. Pam Bondi sat across from her with the same posture she'd held since the beginning. Composed, controlled, still. But the stillness was heavier now. Not guarded. Grounded. Rachel asked, "Have you ever felt the need to apologize for the role you play?" Pam Bondi said, "Yes, but not publicly. Because once you apologize out loud, they stop listening to anything else." Rachel nodded. "And what did you apologize for?" Pam answered, "For letting people think the strength it takes to show up is the same thing as not feeling anything at all." The air in the room didn't move. Not even when Rachel leaned in and said, "I think most people don't understand what it takes to sit in that seat and not ask for permission." Pam said, "That's why I stopped asking for understanding. I started asking for space instead." Rachel asked, "And do you think I've given it to you?" Pam paused. "Not for effect. Just long enough to mean it." "Yes. But I also know the price of being understood too late." No one in the audience shifted. There was no cue to react. Because now the moment wasn't about sides. It was about what it costs to speak in a place built for performance and choose presence instead. Rachel asked, "What do you hope they hear when this airs?" Pam replied, "That I didn't flinch. That I didn't ask to be softened. That I left whole, whether they agreed with me or not." Rachel looked at her. "Do you think they will?" Pam said, "No, but maybe one of them will. And maybe that's enough." The camera light was still on, but no one was thinking about television anymore. They were thinking about what it means to walk into a room that was never built for you and leave without giving it your shape. Rachel Maddow didn't reach for a final card. She didn't signal the crew. She just looked at Pam Bondi and said, "That's everything I had." Pam didn't nod. She just stayed where she was, perfectly still. Then said, "Then maybe we let it end without cutting it down." Rachel asked, "You don't want to wrap it?" Pam replied, "I didn't come for a soundbite. I came for the space to stay intact. And you gave me that. So no, I don't need a bow on it." The control room whispered, "Do we go to break?" "No. Let it ride." The audience didn't stir. No one looked for the applause sign. No one reached for their phones. Because the kind of silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was rare. It was the kind that happens when two people finish something without trying to sell it afterward. Rachel leaned back, folded her hands. She looked at Pam, not as a guest, not as a headline, but as someone who had come to speak and refused to dilute what she brought. You know this moment is going to be misread. Pam said, every moment is. That's not the reason to stay quiet. Rachel asked, so what's the reason to speak? Pam answered, to leave behind something no one can rewrite without lying to themselves about what they saw. Rachel didn't smile. Pam didn't blink. The weight of the exchange had no anger in it, only completion. Finally, Rachel stood. Pam stood with her. No handshake, no photo op, just a shared acknowledgement, quiet, brief, enough. Pam turned to leave. Rachel didn't stop her. She just watched. And when the red light on the camera finally shut off, the room didn't reset, because it had been marked by something it couldn't package. The interview aired in full. No edits, no commentary, no recap, just a single line from Rachel Maddow before the footage rolled. Sometimes, the clearest thing you can do is let someone speak without interruption and let the audience decide what they heard. Then she stepped back, and the screen went black before the segment began. The response wasn't immediate. No viral headline, no sharp clip with added music. But within hours, the full conversation began circulating in quiet spaces. Law schools, journalism classrooms, political discussion boards where people argued less and watched more. One post read, I don't agree with her, but I've never seen someone hold that much pressure without folding or escalating. That was something else. Another said, Maddow didn't challenge her. She didn't flatter her. She just let her. And somehow that felt more confronting than anything. Pam Bondi gave no follow-up interviews. When asked for a comment at an event days later, she said, there's nothing to add to something I said without compromise. She walked away before they could press her. Because she hadn't come to be extended. She had come to be complete. Rachel Maddow was asked privately what she thought of how it played. She said, I didn't win. She didn't win. And that's the part that matters. Someone asked if she'd invite Pam again. Rachel said, if she came back, I'd sit down. But I'd never expect her to come to entertain. The story didn't trend, but it stayed. And every so often, someone would stumble across the full interview, quiet, uncut, unresolved, and realize that confrontation doesn't always come dressed in outrage. Sometimes it comes dressed in stillness. And stillness, when it refuses to yield, is the kind of power no platform can edit down.